Part 2, Chapter 8, On the Cliff. On the morning of June 19th, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt sat in the driver's seat of his Ford convertible parked beside an airstrip in Hyde Park, New York. He watched a small U.S. Army plane descend toward the runway. The plane hit the ground hard, bounced several times, and rattled to a stop. The plane door opened and out hopped Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain, a fat cigar in his hand. Roosevelt smiled and waved. Churchill walked over to the car and got into the passenger seat. The two leaders shook hands warmly. Then Roosevelt gunned his car engine and sped off. He took me to the majestic bluffs over the Hudson River on which Hyde Park, his family home, stands, Churchill remembered. But as the car raced along the edge of the cliff, the Prime Minister had a tough time keeping his mind on the gorgeous view. He kept glancing over at the American, wondering exactly how the man was controlling the vehicle. Roosevelt had polio as a young man and had lost the use of his legs. Roosevelt saw the worry on his friend's face. He explained that he'd had this car specially rigged, allowing for him to work the gas clutch and brakes with his hands, while also steering, of course. Churchill was impressed, but still terrified. Smiling, Roosevelt assured Churchill that his arms were more than strong enough to do the job. He invited me to feel his biceps, Churchill recalled, saying that a famous prize fighter had envied them. This was reassuring. As Roosevelt drove, the two men began talking over the state of the war. And though I was careful not to take his attention off the driving, Churchill said, we made more progress than we might have done in a formal conference. Later that day, the conversation continued in a small office inside Roosevelt's family mansion. They focused on the subject Churchill called overwhelmingly the most important: the race to build an atomic bomb. British and American scientists were both exploring the science. Both had come to the conclusion that a fission bomb was technically possible. I strongly urged that we should at once pool all of our information, work together on equal terms, and share the results, if any, equally between us, Churchill said of the meeting. Roosevelt agreed. The project would be enormously expensive, they knew, and it would mean pulling top scientists off other high priority weapons projects. It was worth the risk, they decided. With Britain still under attack from German bombers, they agreed the actual work of building a bomb would be done in America. There had been a lot of talk so far and some research. Now it was time for action. We both felt painfully the dangers of doing nothing, Churchill recalled. What if the enemy should get an atomic bomb before we did? 3 months later, a 6-foot, 250-pound Army colonel named Leslie Groves was walking down the hallway of a congressional office building on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Groves had one thing on his mind: getting out of Washington. I was, he later said, like every other regular officer, extremely eager for service abroad as a commander of the combat troops. When he saw General Brennan Somerville walking toward him, Groves stopped. The men were alone in the hall. The Secretary of War has selected you for a very important assignment, Somerville told Groves. The President has approved the selection. Where? Asked Groves. Washington. I don't want to stay in Washington. If you do the job right, it will win the war. Groves felt his heart sink. He'd heard rumors about a project to build some kind of super bomb. He was not impressed. Oh, he sighed, that thing. You can do it, Somerville assured him, if it can be done. 46-year-old Leslie Groves was an engineer by training. He'd just finished managing the construction of the Pentagon, the biggest office building in the world. Groves brought the job in on time and on budget. As a reward, he was put in charge of the atomic bomb project. My initial reaction was one of extreme disappointment, he confessed. Groves was a big man with a big personality, loud, bossy, demanding, quick to criticize. He had no hesitation in letting others know of his own high opinion of himself, said one former staff member. Another put it simply: Groves is the biggest SOB I've ever worked for. And yet, everyone agreed that to lead a huge project involving the juggling of dozens of complete tasks, Groves was the right choice. If I can't do the job, said Groves, no one man can. In meetings over the next few days, Groves was given the complete picture. Roosevelt wanted the U.S. Army to take over the atomic bomb project, codenamed the Manhattan Project, because its first offices were located in Manhattan. It was Groves' job to make sure the bomb got built quickly in complete secrecy. Groves was promoted to general and took command of the Manhattan Project on September 8, 1942. I was not happy with the information, Groves grumbled about what he'd learned so far. In fact, I was horrified. It seemed as if the whole endeavor was founded on the possibilities rather than probabilities. Of theory, there was a great deal. Of proven knowledge, not much. When Groves met with the Uranium Committee members in Chicago, they told him that it would take somewhere between 10 and 1,000 pounds of uranium to make the atomic bomb. The wide range infuriated Groves. It would be like trying to plan a wedding, he shouted, and telling the caterer, "We don't know how many guests are coming, maybe somewhere between 10 and 1,000, but see to it that you have the right amount of food for them." Groves knew that he could handle the planning and logistics. The problem was he was going to have to rely on physicists to figure out how to build the bomb. Groves needed to quickly gather a team of the best scientists in the country, and he needed to pick someone to lead it. Robert Oppenheimer wanted the job. Oppenheimer first met Groves on October 8th on the Berkeley campus. Groves was traveling around the country meeting people who'd been working on the Uranium Committee. He and Oppenheimer chatted at lunch. Then Oppenheimer invited Groves back to his office for a long talk. Oppenheimer laid out his vision for getting the bomb built. Work was being done at universities all over the country, he told Groves. Scientists were wasting time doing the same things on different campuses. And because of security worries, they weren't allowed to share information over phone or by mail. That had to end. A major change was called for in the work on the bomb itself, Oppenheimer later explained. We needed a central laboratory devoted wholly to this purpose, where people could talk freely with each other. Groves was impressed. "He's a real genius, a real genius." Groves told a reporter years later, "Why, Oppenheimer knows about everything. He can talk to you about anything you bring up." Well, not exactly. I guess there are a few things he doesn't know about. He doesn't know anything about sports. Groves also liked the fact that Oppenheimer had been born in the United States. Most of the top physicists in the country were from Europe. That made it nearly impossible to carefully check their backgrounds to make sure they could be trusted with American secrets. But Oppenheimer presented problems too. No one with whom I talked showed any great enthusiasm about Oppenheimer as a possible director of the project, Groves lamented. First of all, he was a famously absent-minded scientist, living in an abstract world of ideas and numbers. Could he really be a disciplined, focused team leader? Probably not, said most who knew him. He had, after all, no experience in directing a large group of people, said the German-born physicist Hans Bethe. As a Berkeley colleague put it more bluntly, he couldn't run a hamburger stand. Groves had a gut feeling Oppenheimer could rise to the challenge. The more he thought about it and the more potential candidates he met, the more convinced he became that he wanted Oppenheimer. But there was a bigger problem. Oppenheimer couldn't work on the Manhattan Project until he got security clearance from the Army. Thanks to a report from the FBI, Army intelligence officers knew all about Oppenheimer's past association with communists. Oppenheimer shouldn't be allowed anywhere near the most dangerous secret in the world, argued the FBI, because he might leak the information to his communist friends, and from there to the Soviet Union. Oppenheimer insisted he was a loyal American. He'd sworn he'd never actually join the Communist Party, and that, in any case, his interest in communism was a thing of the past. Groves believed him. FBI agents and Army intelligence officers did not. Groves made the call. It is desired that clearance be issued for the employment of Robert Oppenheimer without delay, ordered Groves. He is absolutely essential to the project. Oppenheimer was given an Army physical and failed. Nearly 6 feet tall, he weighed just 128 pounds. His chain smoking gave him a chronic cough, causing Army doctors to declare him permanently incapacitated for active service. Again, Groves pulled rank. He ordered the doctors to make Oppenheimer eligible for active duty. Oppenheimer wasn't fit to be a soldier, Groves acknowledged, but he might just be able to win the war.